best, it is said, is the enemy of the good. And that is certainly the case with the Rolls-Royce motor car. Many rivals have tried to emulate the claim to produce the best car in the world. But since Rolls-Royce was created in 1906, none have equaled, let alone surpassed, that proud boast. It all began in May 1904, when the Honourable C.S. Rolls, aristocrat, purveyor of high-class French motor cars, and fervent enthusiast, had lunch at the Midland Hotel in Manchester with Henry Royce, sturdily independent engineer and uncompromising perfectionist. Rolls was attracted to the personality of his new friend and delighted with his twin-cylinder 10-horsepower car, Royce car. "You make the cars," said Rolls to Royce. "I'll sell them and we'll call it the Rolls-Royce."
Our look at Rolls-Royce would include a wide selection of silver ghosts. The 20-horsepower model, the 2025, the 2530, stylish Phantom 1s, superb Phantom 2s, and exquisite Phantom 3s. The Silver Wraith, the Silver Cloud, and the Silver Dawn. The music of harmonious engineering as exemplified by the sweet running of a silver ghost. It was that gifted publicist, Claude Johnson, the man often described as the hyphen in Rolls-Royce, who devised the name Silver Ghost for the new 40-50 horsepower car, which was launched at the Olympia Motor Show in November 1906. Until the introduction of the smaller 20 horsepower car in 1922, the Ghost was the only Rolls-Royce in production. And it created the reputation of Rolls-Royce and made the fortunes of the company. It set new standards in automotive engineering and was, as an original advertisement of 1907 stated, the most graceful, the most attractive, the most silent, the most reliable, the most flexible, the most smooth running, in fact, the best six-cylinder car yet produced.
We have two owners with us today, Mr. Peter Harper and Mr. Harry Payne. Mr. Harper, you've travelled here today in the motor car. How was your journey?
It was lovely, very enjoyable. A bit cold and drafty, but very enjoyable.
Could you tell us about your motor?
This is a 1912 Silver Ghost, the last of the low radiator parallel bonnet models, and it has all the features of the early model, which run from 07 to 12. So it obviously has the low radiator and parallel bonnet and the beaded edge 895 135 wheels, the 3-speed gearbox, and the 3/4 elliptic springs. And later on in 12, they started updating them using a cantilever spring and a tapered bonnet and sometimes wider wheels. So this is typical of the early models.
Of its period. It's a beautiful looking body. What sort of body is this?
In fact, this is a replica of a car built for an Indian Maharaja, the Maharaja of Mysore. And the Maharaja would sit in the back in the shade and the poor old servants would sit in the sweltering heat. So the body was rebuilt about 20 years ago as an Indian car.
It looks ideally suited for fine weather.
Yes, it's called a ceremonial phaeton. So it's very good if the weather's fine, and you take a Mac with you if the weather's not.
What about your car, Harry? Yours was not made in this country, I believe.
Well, originally these cars were made in 1920s in America. Most of the basic components were shipped out to America, and Rolls had a factory at Springfield where they assembled these cars, and then the bodywork was made by various coach builders. Various names have been popular. This particular one is known as the Palmaltura, and it was built by Rolls-Royce themselves. They had these bodies custom built, and well,
I think you said it might have been built by a firm called Smith.
According to the records, it's a firm called Smith of Springfield, but they worked so closely with Rolls-Royce that it was called a custom-built body. It has the several modifications to the engine and very beautiful coachwork, in our opinion.
Very beautiful. I can't help noticing that the headlamps are different from the bell-shaped headlamp.
They are the standard American headlamps that were fitted to cars of that period.
Finely wrought and harmonically elegant, the details of the side-valve 40-50 horsepower engine speak of fitness for purpose. It had 6 cylinders in line, set in 2 blocks of 3 with non-detachable cylinder heads. Until 1919, it had dual ignition with magneto and trembler coil, whilst later models had magneto and fixed coil. The massive functional instruments and controls were finished to the same high standards as the engines. In all details, Royce insisted on using the best materials and obtaining the finest available workmanship and the finest available finish. These cars have large engines by today's standards, but at 7,036 cc were considered quite small in Edwardian times. The original bore and stroke, both of 114.3 millimeters, were increased by 1909 to 114.3 millimeters by 120 millimeters respectively, to give overall capacity of 7,428 cc. The brake horsepower was estimated at 48 at 1,250 revs per minute. Rolls-Royce provided the chassis, engine and radiator, but did not build any bodies at this time. Many well-known coach builders exercised their skills on the Ghost chassis. This, for instance, is a 1920 model with a Gill cabriolet body. Other well-known firms which clothed the chassis were Barker, Hooper and Cockshoot. It is strange to reflect that from 1907 to 1925, Rolls-Royce built their paramount reputation solely on this model. And though there was a great variety of body styles, giving a vastly different appearance to each individual car, the same basic structure lay beneath limousine and landaulet, tourer and cabriolet. Of course, over the long period of the production run, many detailed refinements and improvements were incorporated to keep the Ghost well ahead of its rivals. So this late model cabriolet of 1923 by Hooper is different in a multitude of fine points from the earlier Edwardian Ghosts. This is a London to Edinburgh model, similar to the one in which Ernest Hives in 1911 drove entirely in top gear between those two cities. The brake horsepower of this model was increased to 58. The chassis was a special lightweight version with cantilever rear springs, and the body had a tapered bonnet. On a final drive ratio of 2.9 to 1, Hives averaged 24.3 miles per gallon between London and Edinburgh and attained a speed of 78.2 miles per hour on the track at Brooklands.
And you told me that you regarded it as an elegant lady in formal town clothes.
Yes, I think that's right.
Has she always worn the same costume?
Well, I think that she's lost it. Well, she definitely did. She started off life as an open-drive landaulet by Hooper, and she was, in fact, the company's demonstrator in London. But they sold her to a lieutenant colonel who I assume came back from the Great War, and he died soon after and left it to his chauffeur, a story we often hear but seldom is in fact true. And he set up as a taxi driver. And for some time, this was his job, and he used the old lady for that and had one or two others.
So she had to work for her living.
Oh, indeed, and she still does. But things got difficult in the Depression, and she went as a follower to an undertaker, and was last known to be seen with her original clothes at the funeral of one of her better clients. I bought her as a chassis, a body having been made for her, not finished. I had a body Again, the firm went broken, was not finished. And I was very lucky to buy this Hooper open drive limousine body, which had come from Stanley Baldwin's Silver Ghost, to fit on her. And it's only 10 body numbers away from the original.
Our thanks go to Mr. David Johnson for telling us in such detail about his splendid limousine. By contrast, let us glance at a much smaller, lighter, and more practical type of carriage work. Of all the diverse types of body created on the Ghost chassis, none evokes the feeling of an earlier age more poignantly than the Doctor's Coupe. Designed to be compact, convenient, and ultra-reliable, this was a successful professional man's car, which could be made ready for medical emergencies at a press of the starter, thus obviating the need for the tedious harnessing of horses. Hooper, Barker, and T.R. Mullion were just some of the coach builders who provided cars for this lucrative sector of the market. The chassis of this Ghost dates back to 1912, and it is clad in Roi de Belge Tourer bodywork. Here we can appreciate how beautiful is the combination of a polished aluminium bonnet and the finish of high-gloss coach paint, hand-applied by brush. The engine runs sweetly and in near silence, and makes one understand how in its day the Silver Ghost set new standards of quietness and comfort, as well as reliability, and thus raised Rolls-Royce from being an obscure company in the north of England to the position of the acknowledged maker of the world's best car. Though the controls are utilitarian, there is nevertheless an aesthetic appeal in the sparkling surfaces of the exquisitely worked metal, set gracefully with paired dials, framed in lasting and contrasting copper and brass. Before the days of spare wheels, a spare rim was provided, which could be bolted onto the wheel complete with inflated tire. These detachable rims were a necessity when most journeys were undertaken on stony, uneven roads, liberally scattered with discarded horseshoe nails. 6,173 40-50 chassis were produced, plus 1,703 American Springfield models. The engine had a 7-bearing crankshaft and drove through a leather-lined clutch. Everything is constructed to be purposeful and durable, and even the smallest details have great thought put into their finish. A few strokes on the priming pump make the engine ready. A touch on the electric starter, which was fitted from 1919 onwards, and with the gentle hum of precision engineering, this true thoroughbred lies away. This cabriolet body, built in 1920 by Gill, provides a good illustration of the lengths to which coach builders would go to provide their clients with coachwork of outstanding ingenuity and originality. Here is a vehicle with a rigid hood and glass partition, which is transformed by a few simple actions. The frontal aspect is very traditional, with Grecian radiator, Spirit of Ecstasy mascot, and classic bell-shaped headlamps. It is the manner in which the very substantial weatherproof hood and window framing folds completely and neatly away to leave an absolutely open touring body, which catches the imagination and delights the enthusiast. This must have been, in its time, the very last word in adaptability and chic.
Mr. Ivan Odds and Mr. Roy Woolett are both friends who own 40-50 horsepower Rolls-Royces, often referred to as the Silver Ghosts. Though these two motor cars look very different in appearance, I believe that their chassis are very similar.
Well, that's correct. They grew larger and more powerful, but the basic chassis is the same. It's a cabriolet body, which is a very nice bodywork, but one of the interesting things about its mechanics, it was sold in 1923 with front wheel brakes, but Rolls-Royce hadn't perfected front wheel brakes, so they sold the car with two wheel brakes. It then went back to the factory in 1925 to have its front brakes fitted, and they are now superb.
Well, I was going to ask, what is braking like in normal traffic?
Yes, it's very good, up to modern day standards.
And yours,
A bit
Roy?
different than mine, poor. Very poor. With rear wheels brake and transmission brake, it's very, very chancy. The car will go very well, but stopping it is not the best of things. No, it's quite. You have to plan well ahead, and it's quite frightening.
Beautiful cars, gentlemen.
Yes, thank you very much.
I'm sure that their original owners would be pleased to know that they've passed into such lovely hands. Thank you very much.
Much obliged. Thank you.
The cunning of the coach builder is seen at its best on the 1923 Hooper Cabriolet. The folding window frames and the carefully thought out way in which the window glasses fit over the outside of the slats ensured that no rainwater could enter the door cavity, with windows in either open or closed position. The interior, with its side-facing jump seat, is as snug and well-equipped as any saloon. A stylish car, which would be equally at home en route to town house or country seat. An unofficial name, coined after a modified Ghost, had won the 1913 Austrian Alpine trial, then considered Europe's toughest test for a production vehicle, was the Alpine Eagle. In order to cope with the icy bends and steep gradients of the Katschberg Pass, this model was given a larger radiator crowned by Royce's steam separator, larger brakes and stiff tie rods. The engine was modified to produce 68 brake horsepower at 1600 RPM. This car, being the nearest thing to a sports car made by Rolls-Royce, is an exceptional collector's piece.
We're very fortunate in having assembled a quartet of Silver Ghost owners, the 40-50 horsepower Rolls-Royce. All Silver Ghosts may be the same under the skin, but certainly there is a great variety in the styles of bodywork. A very unusual and rather sporty body, I think, Mr. Lloyd.
The car was originated in Ireland, hence the number IA4. It was built for the Barber family in Northern Ireland, the thread company, and they kept it till 1969. It is a Ferguson body, built in Belfast.
Did Ferguson make many bodies for Rolls-Royce?
I don't think so, no.
So yours is exceptional in that the body
one
is
of a few, I gather.
rather exclusive.
That's right.
Perfect for its period, a fine example of the breed. The uneven potholed roads upon which this car originally ran would be deep in abrasive dust or gritty mud. Leather gaiters protected the springs. Upholstery had to be in heavy grade hide, as it was often exposed to the elements. Spare rims were carried, with tires ready inflated, and these could be bolted directly onto the wooden wheels.
What about the body on your car? I couldn't help noticing, Mr. Doyle, that it seems to be a gilded Silver Ghost.
Yes, that's true. The car did not originally start out with that body on it. It was a Vondelet with a body by Cockshoot of Manchester. It was ordered originally by Sir Robert Angus Sanderson of Newcastle, who...
That's a famous name.
Yes, a car manufacturer in actual fact.
Of course.
He never took delivery of the vehicle. It was bought by a family in Southport by the name of Smith, who kept the car until, I think 1933 is the last known record at Rolls-Royce, while it was still in the original ownership.
I believe there was a rather murky period in the history of this particular motor car.
Yes, that's correct. It finally surfaced in Wakefield in West Yorkshire in, I think, about 1968. And this body was built on by a gentleman who lived in Wakefield.
It's a style called Roi de Belge, I think.
Yes, because apparently, or so I believe, the King of the Belgians originally designed a body of that type, not on a Rolls Royce, I don't think, but it's a body style, not common, just the Rolls Royce.
Much credit to him, it's very graceful.
Yes.
In fact, it's an outstanding motor car. Instead of wooden artillery wheels, this 1911 Tourer exhibits stronger, lighter wire wheels. The controls on the steering wheel are, on the left, the throttle governor, which maintains the road speed of the vehicle. On the right is the manual control whereby the ignition could be advanced or retarded. Calibrated precisely and set in brass, these instruments are engineered to defy time and decay, constructed to last forever. All the information which a driver could require would be conveyed exactly during the most difficult and treacherous journeys. On these early Tourers, one notes how high the body sits on the chassis, so that passengers were seated well above the bonnet line, enclosed only by shallow doors and side panels. Again, it may be observed that only the most durable natural materials were employed by the craftsmen who constructed the body. Selected buttoned hides to resist water. Heavy, straight-grained English oak, and pure polished brass. Weather protection was not the first concern of early coach builders. They assumed that their passengers would dress in the heavy waterproof and dustproof garments of the period, though a double set of windscreens would deflect the worst of the rain. About the bodywork on your car, Mr. Neal, this is unusual, very sporty and very proud and elegant.
It was originally a small owner-driven saloon. It was originally bought by C.A. Bird, who was head of the Bird's Custard Company. And I think the last record that Rolls-Royce had was again 1933, when it passed into the hands of an undertaker. And in the mid-50s, Graham Neal discovered it amongst, it was one of 3 chassis that he bought for £100 in the mid-50s. And he sold it to me for £40, having paid the equivalent of £33, 6 and 8 himself for it. And I bought it in 1957 when I was still at school. We towed it home as a chassis. And
so this is a long-standing relationship.
It's a long-standing relationship.
You invested a lot of your youth and your interest in it.
Yes, I've had it quite a long time. And the body, well, I built the frame with the help of Tony Robinson, and then Graham Neal came into the picture again, and he panelled it and did a lot of the detail work. And I made some of the parts, and he did the woodwork, and together we finished it.
It's a great credit to both of you, and of course to Rolls-Royce. The body on yours, Mr. Walker, is another impressive open touring body. Has this body always been on the motor?
No, as you heard, a lot of these cars don't have their original bodies. Mine, I think, was a big limousine originally, and finished up as a taxi and then even a breakdown lorry just before the war. I had a very similar history with mine that Greville here did, but a few years earlier, I bought mine in 1949. I must have paid over the odds. I paid £45 for mine.
These sums of money sound incredible by today's standards.
And that is a body also built by Robinson. I wanted an open tourer because I think a Silver Ghost is primarily a touring car, and although the limousines are very fascinating, I think the charm of the Ghost, the car of that age, is an open touring body.
As were the original Ghosts. They
had all sorts of bodies on. But I personally feel that the touring body is the nicest one on a car of that type.
And is it pleasant to drive? You don't find there's too much wind buffeting? Or
no, it's lovely to drive.
Not too much frantic erecting of the hood in a rainstorm?
No, it's probably better with the hood down, actually, provided you keep moving.
You've all had experience of that, gentlemen. Open cars like this, it must be a great responsibility, surely, with such valuable upholstery and so on. Having an open car, do you not find the danger of sun and rain worries you from time to time?
Well, they need using, don't they?
Yes. And I think if you're worried about things like that, you probably wouldn't have bought a car in the first place.
So they're not cosseted?
No, they're
certainly mine is.
Cared for but not hampered.
Enjoyed.
Yes.
Gentlemen, I hope you enjoy them for a very long time to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Not just a Silver Ghost, but the Silver Ghost. This car was the 13th to be built and had the chassis number 60551. Claude Johnson had its Barker-built Roi de Belge body finished in aluminium paint and provided with silver-plated fittings. In June 1907, this car travelled 14,371 non-stop miles in the Scottish reliability trials, and along with a gold medal, it won a reputation for flexibility, silence and dependability. After its non-stop marathon, the car was stripped down, and the cost of parts required to put it back into new condition was £2, 2 shillings and 7 pence. On its scuttle, it carries an engraved plate bearing the words Silver Ghost. It is now owned by Rolls-Royce Motors. In 1922, the company introduced the 20-horsepower Rolls-Royce to be produced alongside the Silver Ghost, thus ending Johnson's one-model policy. Production continued until 1929, and a total of 2,940 chassis were made. This was a much smaller car, having a wheelbase of only 10 feet 9 inches compared to the 12-foot wheelbase of the later Ghost. Unlike that of the Silver Ghost, the radiator of the 20 had shutters controlled from the instrument panel. These were vertical on later cars. A wide variety of coach builders created bodies on this chassis also. Here, for example, is a Barker Landaulet. The horizontal shutters proclaim it as an early car. There is great harmony in the styling of this particular motor. Every line of the neatly stowed rear roof section has been carefully thought out so that it looks correct from every angle. The interior is tastefully upholstered in West of England cloth. This is understated luxury. There is no heavy brocading or excessively fancy veneering. It is rich but unostentatious. The quality of the fittings, however, is up to the highest standards, as is the level of provision for the creature comforts of the rear seat passengers. The other side of the glass partition, however, presents a different world. Hard-wearing, dark-coloured leather, plain instruments and workmanlike controls show that this is the workplace of the vehicle. Double dipping of the headlights was not executed by solenoids, but through a mechanical linkage operated from the chauffeur's seat. The 3,127cc engine has 6 cylinders, a Rolls-Royce 2-jet carburettor, and single coil with the option of standby magneto. The overhead valves were operated by push rods, and the engine produced 50 brake horsepower at 3,000 revs per minute. There are many types of bodywork on Rolls-Royce motor cars. Some are massive and formal, some are dignified and solemn. But the bodywork on this 20-horsepower Rolls-Royce belonging to Mr. Keith Abram is above all appealing, charming, in a word, pretty.
I would agree with that. That's why I bought the car, because it appealed to me when it was advertised. I knew the model and I wanted it, and I managed to buy it.
Many 20-horsepower Rolls-Royces were designed as owner-driver cars, but this one was not, I believe.
No, this is a chauffeur-driven car. It was owned by Mrs. Stafford originally of the Knightsbridge, of the Hyde Park Hotel, Knightsbridge, and it was used sometimes, I believe, for ferrying VIPs from Paddington and the other mainline stations back to the hotel.
And it's Barker bodywork?
Yes, it's a Barker Landaulet.
And it's still used for ceremonial occasions sometimes?
Yes, I use it for weddings, for local brides, and I donate the money to local charities and sometimes national charities. I will take no payment whatsoever because I don't think that's right.
That shows a very fine attitude, if I might say so. And do you never get tired of people asking you questions about the car?
No, I think they are to be shared and enjoyed by all of us. I'm the fortunate one. I own the car, and I have pleasure and I have great fun in talking to people. I find it most entertaining to myself as well as to them.
I'm so glad that the car is in your possession, Mr. Abram, and I'm sure you're looking after it very well, and I hope you have many, many happy years.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
This is a 2025 Tourer with taut, narrow bodywork and elongated bonnet. The 2025 was the development of the 20 horsepower, and between the First and Second World Wars, it was the company's best-selling single model. It was intended as a smaller companion to the Phantom II and had a taller radiator than the 20. Nor were the only changes cosmetic. Larger section tires and better braking made for greater safety and coincided with an improved chassis lubrication system. The engine ran faster because of improved crankshaft balancing, so that during the production period, 1929 to 1936, the old 20 horsepower engine was much refined, and with a rise in cubic capacity to 3,675 cc, more power was produced. A gearbox with 4 forward speeds was fitted as a unit with the engine, and from 1932 it had the added bonus of synchromesh on third and top. The speeds in the gears were as follows. First, 18 miles per hour. Second, 32 miles per hour. Third, 53 miles per hour. And top, 73.32 miles per hour. This is a replica body by Cook of Leicester and is beautifully executed in the style of Barker on a 1931 chassis numbered GPS 29. A total of 3,827 of this very popular 2025 chassis were built. Some of the better-known contemporary coach builders who provided bodies for the 2025 were Park Ward, Arthur Mulliner, Barker, Connaught, and Wilder. By contrast, here is a large landaulet built on the 2025 horsepower chassis by Hooper in 1934. The solid dark colour suits well with this dignified body style, which is ideal for enjoying enclosed or open-air motoring according to the season. This is the 2025 engine at a late stage in its development. And here, the owner demonstrates the ease and speed with which the change from magneto to coil ignition may be made. A picnic basket is provided to enhance the pleasure of open-top summer days. In the gracious interior, the passengers sit in creamy leather comfort, where in cold weather a foot warmer waits to take off the chill. All occupants were thoughtfully provided with luxury. Even the chauffeur's side of the division has rich leather, a convenient toolkit, and a finely veneered dashboard with neatly grouped instruments. With the rear quarter erected, this imperious vehicle is almost indistinguishable from any other limousine. These large bodies were rather heavy for the 2025 chassis, so the company in 1936 introduced a larger chassis with a more powerful engine and called it the 2530. Total cubic capacity was increased to 4,257. This James Young limousine body was built in 1937 on a wheelbase which had grown to 132 inches, and a typical car weighed 4,300 pounds. So the small Rolls-Royce had grown by 1936 into a rather large car, though not as large as the Phantom, which in 1925 had replaced the Silver Ghost.
3 proud tall radiators, 3 Rolls-Royce Phantoms, and a decade of Rolls-Royce development is encompassed by these 3 cars. The first 2 cars are Phantom 1s, and the third car is a Phantom 3. Mr. Bunn, you own the Phantom 1 saloon.
Yes.
Called, I believe, the Black Diamond.
Yes,
Why
that's
is that?
correct. It has a secret compartment for the transportation of diamonds. The car was originally owned by Otto Oppenheimer, and he used it as a town car in London.
Otherwise, it is a standard body for the time?
No, not a standard body at all. It's an absolutely one-off.
And who was the coach builder?
Hoopers.
And this was designed as a town car?
As a London town car, yes. Probably an owner-driver car.
But the mechanical features, I believe, are similar to those of the Ghost.
Yes, quite similar. It's just a slightly better version than the Ghost engine, a little bit more refined, yes.
And your car, Mr. Vanderleet, this again has an unusual body. What type of body is this?
John Barker.
Yes. And what type of body work is it?
This is known as an enclosed cabriolet, and it carries the additional name of a Prince of Wales. I believe there are only 4 of this particular body in the whole world.
And this was a style favoured by the Prince of Wales?
Yes, because the Prince of Wales wanted he wanted to be seen, and he had to have the hood open.
The opera lights are quite a feature of this bodywork. Are they common to this type of car, or are they unusual?
They're certainly unusual, but I don't know whether they were included originally, but I would say so.
Are the mechanical features similar to that of the Ghost, in the same way that Mr. Bunn's made?
Yes, absolutely, yes. The only additional thing I would like to say that this car belonged to Robert Brooks originally, who was a founder member of the Rolls-Royce Enthusiast Club.
And as the car is original, this is probably why it has lasted so well and is unrestored, because it's always been in the hands of enthusiasts.
That's quite right.
Mr. Crowley's car, on the other hand, is a Phantom 3. A different car in every way, Mr. Crowley, I think.
Yes, it is. It marks a very significant departure from the Phantom 1 you see here. There's 12 cylinders rather than 6, 24 spark plugs, and the first of the pre-war RRs to have an independent suspension system.
So it is a more modern car in many ways?
Yes. If you wanted to summarize in one word, it would be complexity. It is a horrendously complex beast, but when you get them running well, they really do run well.
What is the date of the car, Mr. Crowley?
37.
And those ventilating doors in the bonnet that we noticed, those are a feature of the period?
Yes, they were. And like Mr. Bunn's car, it's a hooper.
I notice, of course, on the radiator you have the kneeling lady rather than the standing figure.
Yes, I'm not up on the architecture or the anatomy of the flying lady, but
that was designed so that the chauffeurs in the day could actually see over the much higher radiator than the normal mascot.
So it would give a better sight.
Much better view. Yes, that was the idea of it.
It's a fine feature. And there is basket work, I think, on the rear of the coachwork.
Yes, that's a later addition, but the rear door has such an unusual coach line. The basket weave does marry very well into the lines of the body.
This is a motor car that was imported from the United States, re-imported, I believe.
Yes, it went to the States in '64, won the Rolls-Royce Owners Club P3 prize in '65, and the AACA Hershey prize in '66. And I brought it back last year.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for talking to me. A fine trio of Phantoms. You must be very proud of them. Thank you for letting me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This outstanding example of the rather unusual Sedanka body style was created in 1937 by Hooper. Designed to be as individual as a signature, it is obvious that no expense has been spared to give the car presence and authority. The well-balanced and regal body line and the layout of the front compartment are surprisingly modern for the pre-war period. Equally individual is the famous black diamond limousine, built in 1928 on the Phantom 1 chassis. Once seen, this profile is unforgettable, and it must have been a well-known sight in pre-war years as it transported its celebrated owner around London. As was often the case with exclusive bespoke bodywork, special features were stipulated by the client. In this case, all the accessories, including the radiator, are silver-plated. The tinted glass exterior sun visors are a most unusual and advanced feature. The tail of the car, with its blind quarters and small rear window, provides personality and styling, and privacy in the interior. The front seat has body-hugging contours, which would perhaps indicate that it was intended for the owner-driver. The Rolls-Royce trademark of manual advance and retard control and throttle governor remain traditionally in the center of the steering wheel. An ingenious spring-loaded window lift simplified the giving of hand signals. Locks and keys of a type more usually encountered on a safe gave security to the vehicle and its valuable cargo. A shape to conjure up in the mind the writings of Scott Fitzgerald and the era of the Great Gatsby. This splendidly rakish touring car, made in 1933 by Brewster, would have been very much at home amongst the mansions of Long Island.
Dr. Rolfe, an American-bodied car, I believe.
Yes, it is. The original owner of the car was C. Matthew Dick, heir of the A.B. Dick mimeograph fortune. And he, according to the family, that he flunked out of most schools they put him into, but he did get through the architectural engineering schools. So he worked with the Brewster people to design this car. Most cars reflect the character of the owner, and most owners that were buying these cars were very conservative. Cars of the very flamboyant style were usually made to attract attention at auto shows by the coach builders or a person very secure in their social position. And the C. Matthew Dick was very secure.
Does that mean that you're a flamboyant character, Dr. Rolfe?
No, it's just that I appreciate having a very lovely car. The Rolls-Royce Owners Club of America considers one of the most beautiful of the Rolls-Royce bodies built.
It is, in fact, unique.
It's very unique, again, because most of these cars are very conservative, and this, again, is very flamboyant. There are only two Rolls-Royces known to have the V'd windscreen, which I think is more of a Duesenberg development in America. This is one, and the other one is chassis number 69WJ, but it has more modern type coachwork in the rear.
A windscreen indeed to cleave the air, artfully coupled with a carriage-like rear compartment that speaks of style and class. Many experts regard the Phantom II as the finest Rolls-Royce chassis of all, and this shapely bonnet hides a powerful engine of 7,668 cc. From every angle, this is good body language, and it is spoken with a definite American accent. Basket weave panels have great aesthetic appeal, but would require the presence and care of a professional chauffeur if they were to be maintained to perfection. Unashamed, sybaritic luxury characterizes the trimmed and tailored interior. Ernest Hives, later Lord Hives, who became chairman of Rolls-Royce Motors subsequently, went out in 1920 to inspect the American Brewster plant. He was very impressed and wrote back to Derby, "The best American bodies are better built and better finished than the English. They are made to more practical designs and have better fittings. Brewster was, of course, the most famous American coach-building firm, but other fine bodies were made by Hibbard and Darrin and Merrimack. The Phantom II was in production from 1929 to 1935, and this 1929 model is one of the first to be made. Coach builders loved this chassis, for it had a grace of proportion not hitherto seen on a Rolls-Royce, and some would say not achieved since. The bodywork on this lovely car is by Rowan.
There is no such thing as an ugly Rolls-Royce, and there is no such thing as an ordinary Rolls-Royce. But the motor car belonging to Mr. David Bellis is extraordinarily beautiful and extraordinary in every other way.
Thank you.
A most interesting history, Mr. Bellis. Please tell us something about it.
Well, the car was built in 1929. It is a Phantom II. It was owned by a lady, and at that time it was a lawn delay. That meant the back quarter of the rear of the car opened up so you could have your head out in the sunshine. It went to America in its early life, and then it came back and was owned by a director of Spear and Jackson in Sheffield. Later it was donated to the war effort, and it was converted to an ambulance, and it served its time in the war as an ambulance. I think it was in East Anglia somewhere. When I bought it, it was an ambulance, but between me buying it and the end of the war, it had gone on the Alpine Rally over to Vienna, and it was a gentleman who was crippled who owned it, Mr. Jones, and he used to use it, and he had a wheelchair, and it was all fitted out, and I think it was very brave taking it on these rallies. Yes.
A much-travelled car. Do you travel much with the car yourself now, David?
Yes, last weekend we just came back from France. We did 2,500 miles around France, down to the south of France in the Pyrenees, and we had no trouble whatsoever with the car.
So it's still used as a grand tourer?
Oh yes, all over Europe we go on our holidays, and we enjoy the car.
The Rolls-Royce monogram looks unusually impressive when embossed on fine leather and surrounded by deeply cushioned hide seating. This rich but restrained tone is continued by well-matched veneers and clear instruments, simply marked with white on a black background, which give in an exact form all the information the driver requires, even to a dual fuel gauge which tells him in gallons and litres how much petrol he has left. The finer lines of the Phantom II chassis were achieved by a reduction in the height of the car resulting from underslung rear springs, the extremely long tapered bonnet, and the fact that the steering wheel was almost exactly halfway between the axles. For the first time on the Phantom II, a Rolls-Royce engine was mounted solidly to the chassis instead of being carried on a subframe. At the same time, a rubber-insulated body subframe was provided, thus enabling coach builders to build bodies as the chassis was being erected, and so save time. A large hood is provided for this touring body, and a graceful set of folding auxiliary screens which have a great glass area and narrow frames, offering sensible protection for the rear seat passengers.
Mr. Whittaker has a most unusual Rolls-Royce. The body is by Kellner, and this is a gracious car, a gracious carriage. Tell us something about the car, would you please, Mr. Whittaker?
The car was built for to the order of an Anglophile American called Sir Pomeroy Burton, and he had this car as his south of France transport, and he kept it at his villa at Cap d'Antibes from 1929 to 1936, when he replaced it with the later model, the Phantom III. And at the same time, he also kept a 20-horsepower car in Berkeley Square at his townhouse there. So
also
I think,
a Rolls-Royce?
Yes, I think he must have been an enthusiast.
And how did you acquire the car, Mr. Whittaker?
I bought it when a collection of Rolls-Royces was sold by Mr. Frey in Locarno in Switzerland in 1980. And it had been gathering dust in a motor house there for a number of years, and now I put it back on the road. And
So from being a static exhibit, it is now once again a road car.
yes, over the last 6 or 7 years, the engine has been completely rebuilt, it's been resprayed and restored to the original cafe-au-lait, which we found traces of.
Sir Pomeroy had it sprayed in this colour originally?
Yes, this is as close as we can get to the original appearance of a car.
What's special about the body? Are there any special interior fittings?
Yes, the car is unusual in that all the brightwork is silver-plated, and there is also a special French feature in that the front windows fold down and disappear, which I think is possibly unique to Kellner.
And Kellner was a Parisian coach builder?
Yes, considered a high-quality coach builder of the 1920s and 30s.
I noticed the opera lamps. That is always a characteristic of high-class coach buildings, I've been told.
Yes, I believe it was that people could identify their vehicle when they came out, but I just don't know if that's true from the opera.
Burning outside the opera.
As Mr. Whittaker said, Kellner was a high-quality Parisian coach builder. He was an artist craftsman, and some of his best work was done for the celebrated Ettore Bugatti, for whom he designed and built a fabulous Royale body. The whole car has the stamp of quintessential good taste. The skills of the cabinet maker and upholsterer are artfully married to those of the engineer. Opulence in itself is never enough to create automotive art, and here we see finesse and dignity of concept, where every aspect is considered. Aesthetically, every curve is calculated and every mass balanced. When introduced in 1929, the Phantom II was an exceptionally fine car, but Sir Henry Royce's policy of continuous development meant that in the next 6 years, more than 60 changes were made to the specification. In 1930, for instance, 20-inch wheels replaced the 21-inch wheels of this model. Note the silent precision with which the radiator shutters are controlled from the dashboard. These became thermostatically controlled in 1931. Here one may observe the Rolls-Royce twin-jet carburettor. At this stage, the electrical system is still of Rolls-Royce's own manufacture. The chassis of this 1933 Phantom II is fitted with a more recent replica touring body. The Phantom II was offered at £1,900, no increase in price over its noble, but by this time somewhat old-fashioned predecessor. In fact, the Phantom II has very little in common with the Phantom I, except the cylinder bore and stroke dimensions. 4¼ inch bore by 5½ inch stroke, giving 7,668 cc. It resembled rather an enlarged edition of the successful 20 horsepower model. For like the 20, the engine, clutch and gearbox were in one unit. On this model also, Rolls-Royce first introduced the centralized chassis lubrication system. At first this was somewhat complex, having separate systems for the frame, the front axle and the rear axle. But from 1933, flexible pipes were used to obviate this complication. The work of the mechanic or chauffeur was considerably lightened by this system, for on the Phantom I there were no fewer than 84 points which had to be lubricated every 1,000 miles. The Phantom II was produced in 2 lengths. The short chassis was 16 feet 8 inches overall, and the long chassis measured 17 feet 2 inches. The first Phantom IIs had a front track of 4 feet 10½ inches, and this grew only by 1/4 inch from 1933. The rear track, however, was enlarged from the original 4 feet 10½ inches to 5 feet 1/4 during the production run, which ended in 1935. 1,767 of these cars were produced. And then came the Phantom III. Based upon Rolls-Royce's experience in building multi-cylinder V-formation aero engines, the power unit of this car was the most technically advanced in the world in production at the time. This is a 1937 limousine by Hooper. The body on this 1937 Phantom III was built in 1977 by Wilkinson. With its high, severe, pure waistline, divided windscreen, dicky seat, it is reminiscent of the Brewster-built Henley and Playboy styles. Side-mounted spare wheels, white wall tires, and long, flaring running boards all reinforce the image. The Phantom III was the first Rolls-Royce to have independent front suspension. This system, based on the General Motors principle, consisted of a wishbone lever arrangement controlled by coil springs and hydraulic dampers enclosed in oil-filled housings. The absence of heavy dumb irons and leaf springs at the front of the chassis enabled the engine and radiator to be moved forward, thus facilitating the mounting of exceedingly spacious coachwork on a shortened chassis. For an advanced and highly stressed engine of this complexity, adequate cooling was required, and many louvres plus bonnet doors provided airflow. These views show the severely classic finish to the interior. This again is very much in the American idiom. Note how the heavily plated hood mechanism is anchored in and stowed behind the bench seat. The dashboard also exhibits a simple arrangement of instruments, though its veneering is beautifully executed to emphasize pattern and shading. The dicky seat in most bodies of this type and period is usually difficult of access, but here a neat short door has been thoughtfully provided. The Phantom III was in production from 1936 to 1939, and only 710 of these advanced and complex machines were built. The engine has 12 cylinders arranged in 60-degree V formation, each with twin sparking plugs. A bore of 3 1/4 inches by a stroke of 4 1/2 inches gives a total cubic capacity of 7,340. Above the engine is mounted a single duplex downdraft type carburetor. In 1936, the price of the chassis was £1,800. The Silver Wraith. This 1955 long wheelbase limousine by Hooper exhibits exquisite razor-edge styling of the type which in the post-war years was often seen outside palaces, embassies, and government offices. The continuation of the front wing line past the totally enclosed rear wheel aperture is a characteristic Hooper styling device. The Rolls-Royce Wraith had been announced in October 1938 with a redesigned 4,257cc engine and a new chassis frame. It was in production for just 1 year, and only 491 were made by the outbreak of hostilities. During the war, Rolls-Royce developed this 4 1/4 litre engine, and with a revised valve layout, it was used to power the 1947 Silver Wraith. Step up into a Hooper body, spacious and gracious. All is provided for your comfort and your pleasure. The finest fittings created by the best of British craftsmanship, the most thoughtful design, the most scrupulous attention to detail add up to the best. Step into the driver's seat. The experience is the same. Consideration, convenience, beauty, and balance. This is style that never falters. Creative art and inventive genius employed for the benefit of the touring motorist. This is, by the way, an absolutely original, totally unrestored car. How do the owners of these superb vehicles view the responsibility of their trust? I asked Mr. Matthews, who owns the Phantom 3 Roadster, and Mr. Keith J., who owns the 2025 and the Silver Wraith, to give their views.
I do feel that the pleasure of having them is not only ourselves, but for other people to admire as well, and that's the pleasure we all get from it.
Well, that's certainly true. A lot of people have admired both your cars today, and a lot of people have been around them, they've seen them. You must be wary of answering questions about them.
Well, the cars we really hold in trust. It's a heritage. Hope they'll be here for many, many more years, not 10 or 20, maybe 100 years, because they're superbly engineered and beautifully built, and provided they're regularly looked after and serviced and cared for, then it's part of English heritage.
That's an admirable point of view, and I hope you enjoy them for a long time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
A passing cloud. A Silver Cloud 1 of 1958, to be precise. Perhaps it is difficult to realize that this beautiful shell is a standard body from the Pressed Steel Company. The chief body engineer at Rolls-Royce, John Blatchley, and his design team looked after the styling. This long, elegant shape was definitely influenced by the H.J. Mulliner lightweight four-door sports saloon style, which was first seen in 1950. When the Cloud was introduced in 1955, the original catalogue stated, rather modestly, the coachwork of the Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud does not slavishly follow the dictates of fashion. A 5-seater saloon with room for 6 when required. It is a luxurious yet practical motor car. The gently sloping bonnet, curved windscreen, and large rear window mean improved visibility, while the new car is lower with no reduction of headroom. The body is mounted on an immensely strong chassis, which had a 50% increase in torsional rigidity over the chassis of the Silver Dawn. The straight-six engine represented the final form of that which was introduced in 1922 for the 20 horsepower model, and throughout the 37 years of its development, it retained the original bore of 3 3/4 inches and stroke of 4 1/2 inches. The interior of these cars set a very high standard, finished in the finest coach building tradition, using such materials as Circassian walnut veneers, leather upholstery, West of England cloth headlining, and deep pile Wilton carpets. The fascia panel carries modern instruments and controls. To obviate some of the problems of corrosion in a standard steel body, the doors, the bonnet, and the boot lid were constructed of aluminium. Heavenly body indeed, reflected glory. A Silver Cloud 2 in concours condition. It is interesting to note that during its production run from 1955 to 1966, the Silver Cloud always had an automatic gearbox fitted as standard. This particular car is an H.J. Mulliner convertible, which is totally original. Since it was made in 1961, it has covered only 59,000 miles, and it owes much of its pristine beauty to the fact that it spent most of its life in Hawaii and was only recently re-imported into this country. Though Rolls-Royce had been working on an entirely new engine unit since 1947, it was not until September 1959 that they announced that the Silver Cloud 1 was to be superseded by the Silver Cloud 2 with a light alloy V8 engine of 6,230 cc and power-assisted steering fitted as standard equipment. The coachwork of the Silver Cloud remained basically unaltered from that of the 6-cylinder cars. Sitting inside the new cars, one noticed that the speedometer was calibrated to 120 miles per hour, and that the steering wheel was smaller and more comfortably thin-rimmed. New air vents placed at each end of the instrument panel capping rail enabled the occupants to direct air in any desired direction simply by moving the neat louvres. When production of the Silver Cloud 2 ended in 1962, the Silver Cloud 3 was introduced. The first Rolls-Royce to be equipped with a standard steel, factory-made body was the Silver Dawn.
Mr. Gareth Morgan has a really fine 1953 Silver Dawn. Unrestored, I believe, Mr. Morgan.
Yes, it is, basically in its original condition. And I've used it as a family car ever since I've owned it. I think that my children have always been brought up in it, had a tremendous amount of enjoyment. We've used it for holidays all over the United Kingdom. I haven't ventured outside the UK in it, but I can certainly look back and reflect on many happy holidays because it's such an ideal family car.
And it was designed by Rolls-Royce as an owner-driver car, was it not?
Indeed it was, yes. The idea is, I think, that one no longer requires a chauffeur to drive you around, but you can, in fact, drive it yourself and get some enjoyment out of the car because it's sufficiently manageable, really, to be a classic car, if you like, if that's the appropriate term to use for a Rolls-Royce, but which you can use every day.
How does the engine perform in modern conditions?
Well, the engine performs very well. I've recently been driving it on British motorways, and I can say that it'll cruise at quite a respectable speed. It does draw tremendous attention on the motorways. This is something that my children find quite fascinating, because I suppose one is one of the few elderly, distinguished ladies, as I think of my car, as you're driving along the motorway. Other passengers or in other motor cars are fascinated by it. You're perpetually aware of faces turning round looking at you, other people nudging each other so that they can see it. So you're very conscious of the fact that you're flying the flag of a very distinguished mark.
Is that the only problem with a car which is, after all, 30 years old? Are there any technical problems? What is the maintenance of the engine like?
Well, the maintenance of the engine is no great problem at all. It's not necessary, in my view, to have to take it to some person of very immense expertise. A well-qualified and competent engineer can service it thoroughly adequately.
In your own area?
Indeed. I'm very fortunate here in central Wales in having a very good engineer who can service it for me, and provided I carry out the basic instructions of service that are contained in the owner's handbook, then I'll honestly say I have totally trouble-free motoring.
I think you were telling me earlier that these are quite rare now, these Silver Dawns.
Yes, there were just over 700 of them made originally, and the first ones were aimed basically at the American market. And I'm told that about 2/3 of this particular model were exported in the first instance, and this probably accounts for the fact that there are not that many left in the United Kingdom, and it is in effect quite a sought-after car. Sought after, I think, because it's quite a pretty car, yet not too large, reasonably economical, and
what would it do to the gallon?
Well, I find that mine on a long journey will do somewhere around 20 miles to the gallon, which by any standards I think is very good.
And what size is the engine, Gareth?
It's 4.5 litre.
That's very commendable, isn't it?
It is indeed, yes.
And the body was made by Rolls-Royce, wasn't it, on the chassis? That was the first time that they'd actually manufactured their own body.
That's right. It's a Rolls-Royce standard steel body. You did have the option, actually, of having a coach-built body on this particular car. And there are one or two examples in existence, but they are very rare indeed. I would say probably most of them carried a standard steel body.
And you've always found that perfectly satisfactory?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, I must admit that probably it's far more expensive to maintain the body in good condition than the mechanics, because living in this type of climate, one has to bear the problems of salt and wet, and you have to make sure, of course, that the car is put away in a dry condition, kept in a well-aired garage and that sort of thing. But it's certainly very strong, very strongly built, and if one has to carry out any particular repair to the body, then it's very much easier to do that than it is with the mass-produced motor car that one would buy at the present time.
This has a separate chassis underneath the body.
Oh, it has.
Yeah.
The whole car weighs about 2 tons, and considering its weight, I always amazed to find that one can get 20 miles to the gallon, and on a motorway you can cruise along at about 75 miles an hour or even 80 miles an hour if you're wanting to break the law. I mean, something I never do, of course, as you can well imagine.
I do admire you for using it as an everyday car, Gareth, and I hope you maintain it and use it for a long time to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
It is hard now to imagine life without the motor car. It has changed the pattern of trade, of leisure, of family life. Indeed, the whole direction of civilization has been modified because pioneers like Rolls and Royce sought to tame the dangerous and capricious internal combustion engine and transform it into the docile and willing servant of man.